Imagine a place where the barrier between the past and the present is crumbling. A place where the past isn't merely memory or history, but a physical presence ready to leak into your life, altering your perception of reality with a sudden, sickening lurch. This is not fiction. This is the Scottish Highlands, a landscape so vast, so ancient, and so remote that it seems to operate under its own private set of physical laws, where the rules of time and space are not constant, but are instead constantly in flux, elastic, and unreliable. We are drawn here by the sheer, staggering, and often melancholic beauty of its mountains, its lochs, and its lonely coastline. Yet, beneath that stunning cinematic exterior lies an unsettling and persistent truth. This remote, as isolated region has been a perpetual nexus for unexplainable phenomena for millennia, earning it a chilling reputation as one of the most chronologically and paranormally active zones on Earth. Today, we will meticulously explore the evidence that suggests the very fabric of reality itself is tearing open across these high moors and glens, revealing terrifying, consistent, and documented glitches in time. The foundational mystery of the Highlands begins with the deep, violent past. The sculpting hand of massive prehistoric glaciers did more than just carve mountains. They effectively wiped the slate clean, eradicating virtually all human traces and archaeological evidence of habitation before approximately 10,000 BC. This unprecedented geological erasure created a profound, disturbing historical blank space, a cavern of unknown time that immediately prompts the existential question, who or what truly occupied this cold northern frontier before our known ancestors, the early Scot and Celt tribes, ever set foot here? The earliest human groups who did eventually manage to settle this rugged environment did not merely survive. They forged a culture that was deeply intertwined with ritual awareness and spiritual terror. We know this from their monumental architecture, massive stone clocks and temples, like the Callanish stones on the Isle of Lewis, and the enigmatic, perfectly preserved Neolithic settlement of Skara Brae on Orkney. These structures are not just old, they are so ancient that they predate the Great Pyramids of Egypt, testaments to a spiritual life that deeply connected the early inhabitants to earth energies and cosmological forces we no longer acknowledge or understand. Their existence implies a deep, non-rational preoccupation with the movement of celestial bodies and the power of the land itself, a power that clearly commanded respect, or perhaps fear. By the time of the Iron Age, the region was the domain of the Celts and the indigenous, fiercely independent Picts, the legendary painted people. When the mighty Roman Empire, the great engine of classical order and empirical logic, finally arrived in Britain, they quickly dubbed the untamable area Caledonia. The Romans, pragmatic architects of modernity who sought to subdue and assimilate, ultimately deemed the highlands unconquerable. They found the mountains too treacherous, the terrain too difficult to police, and the land too barren to be worth the massive military and economic effort of long-term occupation. They chose instead to erect Hadrian's Wall, a monumental physical barrier that served not just as a border of their empire, but as a symbolic line of demarcation separating their ordered, linear world from this realm of persistent wildness, archaic terror, and untamed spiritual power. This historical isolation proved absolutely crucial. It acted as an incubator, allowing the old ways, the pervasive superstitions, and the potent, complex folklore to endure for millennia, virtually untouched by the rationalizing tide of outside influence. The belief systems of the Highlands are therefore not just charming, outdated myths, they are a continuous, unbroken cultural memory stretching back to the Iron Age. Even today, the supernatural is seamlessly integrated into the daily reality of many Highlanders. They speak openly and without irony of seeing the Fae, or the CDA, other mystical entities who demand respect and, occasionally, tribute. Many still perform necessary rites to protect their homes, leaving out offerings of bread and milk to guard against the mischievous changelings and adhering to traditional practices for warding off malign influences and the evil eye. The countless dark lochs are said to harbor kelpies, beautiful but deadly water horses that deliberately lure victims to a watery grave, demanding an annual sacrifice. The coasts hide the selkies, shape-shifting beings of the sea who move between two worlds. Travel further north, and the deep-seated belief in the power of witchcraft and the fear of spirits like the banshee, or the lesser-known Bean Nige, the terrifying washerwoman spirit who is always seen washing the blood-stained clothes of those who are soon to die, becomes more intense, more visceral. Skeptics often try to dismiss this persistent spiritual tapestry as a simple result of isolation and tradition, arguing that the pervasive mist, dark reflective water, and deep glens naturally breed superstition. But this rationalization fails to account for the extraordinary longevity and consistency of these tales, many of which can be documented back hundreds or even thousands of years with continuous accounts of strange, unyielding events echoing through history. For the believer, the Highlands possess a distinct, almost sentient energy, a primal, untamed current where the unknowable still holds absolute power, lying in wait just beyond the easily dismissed boundaries of our conventional history books. The land itself seems to be the guardian of secrets far older than written history. The stories of the Highlands move beyond simple spectral sightings and into the terrifying, rigorous realm of temporal mechanics. The following account suggests that the powerful energy generated by extreme human emotion or trauma can either become a permanent psychic record, playing out past agony for future witnesses, a residual haunting, or, conversely, that a powerful, often disastrous future event can project its shadow backwards across decades, distorting the present, a prescient phenomenon. These phenomena challenge the very structure of cause and effect. The first and arguably most devastating example is a chilling chronicle from Inverness in the 1980s, a story that perfectly illustrates the nature of psychic residue. A local elderly woman was enjoying a rare social gathering when she overheard a young couple discussing a profoundly horrifying problem. The isolated cottage they had recently bought was haunted by a repetitive, sickening noise. They described being routinely woken night after night by dull, rhythmic thudding coming from the area of their living room fireplace. The sound was not random. The pattern was so precise, so unvarying over multiple nights, that it suggested a deliberate, agonizing action. The husband, driven by dread and curiosity, finally went to investigate. What they saw was a sight that tore through their ordered reality, an apparition, a young woman in antique clothing, her face contorted by silent tears, her long brown hair damp and clinging to her cheeks. Mistaking her at first for a severely disturbed person, the husband called out, attempting to reason with her, but she gave absolutely no acknowledgement. She appeared to be wholly absorbed in a private, silent hell. Then, without warning, the spectral figure began violently and repeatedly striking her own head against the wall immediately above the mantelpiece. The sounds were exactly the rhythmic, sickening thuds they had been hearing night after night, now witnessed in their agonizing source. To their horror, as her head met the plaster again and again, vivid, crimson streaks seemed to ooze and spread through the wallpaper. The couple watched in terrified, paralyzed silence until the wife's self-control finally shattered and she screamed. At that moment, the figure began a slow, terrifying process of dissipation, fading like smoke until she was completely gone, leaving only the sickening memory and perhaps the subtle stains. Crucially, the ordeal repeated itself. The precise, rhythmic thudding, the silent weeping, the violent decay. A chilling, nightly recurrence that defied all natural laws of a haunting, operating instead like a corrupted, self-playing film reel. The elderly partygoer listened in mounting horror, a familiar deep sickness rising in her chest and throat. She had to know, and she forced the question, where exactly was this cottage? When the couple named the location, her deepest fear was confirmed, locking the two realities together. It was the very house she had lived in with her family some 4 decades earlier. Fighting back overwhelming tears, she recounted her own life-shattering trauma, discovering a series of intensely personal love letters addressed to her husband from another woman during the height of the Second World War. Overwhelmed by betrayal, despair, and an uncontrollable surge of emotional pain, she had spent that entire night alone by the fireplace, crying and repeatedly banging her own head against the plaster wall in utter, soul-crushing agony. She had struck herself so hard, so violently, that it left lasting physical scars, which she now revealed on her forehead to the stunned couple. She had, in her rawest moment of suffering, imprinted her profound, concentrated distress onto the very structure of the building itself. This is the classic residual haunting, or what some researchers term the stone tapes phenomenon, a psychic recording so potent that a single extreme moment of emotional energy became looped in time and space, condemned to play the exact sequence of anguish for tenants who weren't even born when the trauma originally occurred. The agony was not an active ghost, it was an echo trapped in the matter of the house. We then find a contrasting yet equally disturbing temporal anomaly on the Isle of Skye, the rugged jewel of the Inner Hebrides, which suggests not residual energy but a forward-projecting force. For over 3 decades, from the 1930s all the way through to the 1960s, the island was cursed by a vehicular phantom known simply as the Wee Black Car. Witnesses, both unprepared tourists and hardened locals, repeatedly reported seeing an old vintage black car careening down the narrow serpentine roads at terrifying, impossible speed. Drivers would quickly pull over to avoid a fatal collision, only to watch the car vanish without a trace, not into the distance, but simply out of existence, after rounding the next bend or entering a dip in the road. The sightings became so pervasive, so consistent, that they were treated not as a terrifying supernatural event, but as a known, bizarre local feature. John McTavish, a ferry worker at Craignethan, where the island connects to the mainland, was a committed skeptic for years, often attributing the stories to the famously thick Highland fog, the deceptive winding roads, or a deliberate scheme to boost tourist intrigue. But in 1962, McTavish's rational world was shattered by his own terrifying encounter. Driving to work before dawn, he watched an antiquated black car quickly overtake him. As it sped past, its black silhouette flashed against the first light of the rising sun. He strained to see the occupants, but could distinguish only 2 shadowy jet-black figures inside. He watched, transfixed, as the car rounded the curve ahead and slowly, undeniably, dissolved into the air, fading into the ether. His skepticism was irrevocably shattered. His nightmare, however, was incomplete. A few weeks later, while working the crane at the ferry dock, an identical black 1934 Austin drove onto the boat. The driver, a woman, was visibly nervous and was being helped by a local minister. In a terrifying, instantaneous sequence, the vehicle suddenly accelerated for no discernible reason, shot across the deck, and plunged into the frigid water below. The woman and the small child inside drowned. The tragic, crushing finality of the event was confirmed by one crucial, chilling observation. The Wee Black Car was never sighted again on the Isle of Skye from that day forward. This was not a past event recording itself. This was a potent, prescient phenomenon. The shockwave of a future trauma, a moment of violent accidental death, was so significant to the island's psychic landscape that it leaked backwards through time, manifesting as a ghost car for 30 years, a devastating, persistent premonition that ceased the moment the tragedy finally occurred and the energy was discharged. This chronal instability, which suggests time can loop, repeat, and even foretell, is not confined to remote coasts and villages. South of Glasgow, the heavily wooded area between East Kilbride and High Blantyre is a meticulously documented hotspot for incidents of lost time and spatial shifts, hinting at a deep and persistent temporal distortion field. In the late 1960s, a teenager named Scott Campbell was cycling through the woods when he discovered an astonishing sight. A stately, massive mansion appearing like a cross between a formidable castle and a grand Victorian estate, complete with a highly distinct octagonal tower and defensive merlins crowning its walls. He stopped for several minutes, admiring the unique, powerful architecture which seemed misplaced in the woods. When he retraced his path just an hour later, the impressive, unmistakable structure was gone. Only an empty clearing and the trees remained. He later described the mansion in meticulous, perfect detail to friends at the pub. Their faces went pale with shock when they retrieved an old text. The painting inside confirmed his exact sighting of Craignethan Castle near Blantyre. His friends then delivered the final unnerving blow. The castle had been deliberately demolished in 1951. Campbell had accurately and comprehensively witnessed a complex architectural structure that had been physically absent for over a decade, a chronological impossibility. Decades later, the very same woods claimed another victim of temporal dislocation, showcasing the erratic, unpredictable nature of the anomaly. A woman named Rose set out on a flora survey at 9:00 a.m., arranging to meet a friend at 12:30 p.m. The day was described as chilly, but sunny and unremarkable. She hiked up steep slopes and arrived at the Hermitage Islet. Leaving her mobile phone behind, she took her digital camera up the hill to find the old boundary stones, estimating she spent no more than 30 minutes taking photos and collecting samples. But as she began her walk back, the environment was fundamentally, violently different. The sky had turned a dark, bruised gray, the wind was suddenly bitterly cold, and she was overcome by a profound physical sense of disorientation, despite knowing the woods well. By the time she reached the islet, it was night, so dark she needed her flashlight. The river, another physical constant, was alarmingly high. She checked her mobile phone and was overcome with nausea and panic. The time was 8:30 p.m. Over 10 hours of her life had simply vanished, erased without sensation, memory, or explanation. The ultimate crushing paradox, however, was that the digital camera she used confirmed the photos were taken just after 10 a.m. with the correct internal time code embedded in the files. She had experienced a temporal vacuum, a black hole in her own timeline, where her perception and reality diverged by 10 impossible hours. When faced with accounts this consistent, this geographically concentrated, and this meticulously detailed, from the residual emotional scar of a mother's trauma replaying nightly to the literal, scientifically verifiable loss of a workday, dismissing them as simple hallucinations, folklore, or hoaxes becomes intellectually dishonest and fails to account for the physical evidence. These are not minor discrepancies. They are seismic, repeated failures in our established model of perceived reality. The haunting in Inverness fits the model of a residual energy pattern, where an extreme, isolated emotional event generates enough psychic energy to permanently record itself onto the physical environment. In the same way that a massive earthquake leaves a traceable fault line in the crust of the earth, a massive, concentrated psychological upheaval can leave a permanent vibrational imprint in the physical matter of a building. However, the wee black car of Skye and the Craignethan Castle sighting point to a more terrifying systemic flaw. The car was a proactive psychic projection, a foretelling so urgent that it couldn't wait for its moment to occur, violating causality. The castle and Rose's lost hours represent a true time slip, a momentary lapse in synchronization with the established consensus reality. To grapple with this level of chronological chaos, we must look beyond traditional paranormal explanations toward the fringes of science. Many serious paranormal investigators, and even some theoretical physicists exploring quantum mechanics, postulate that our linear perception of time, the strict progression from A to B to C, is merely a function of our human consciousness, a necessary cognitive trick to help us navigate and process the world. The physical universe, they suggest, may not obey this strict marching progression. Instead, the ultimate reality may be that the past, present, and future all coexist simultaneously, like frames in a massive infinite reel of film, all playing at once. In certain rare geographical locations where unique geological stress, unusual magnetic anomalies, or the sheer potent saturation of deep, intense emotional history has created a thinning of the space-time membrane, a vulnerability in the conventional wall between time periods. It becomes possible for moments from other times to briefly, terrifyingly intrude upon our own. Scott Campbell was, for a few precious minutes, standing in a past where the stones of Craignethan Castle still stood proud and intact. Rose, while taking her photos, may have inadvertently stepped decades or even centuries into a past where the area was completely wild and devoid of human reference points, only to have her own reality jump forward 10 hours when she violently snapped back into the present moment. Her camera, recording its own reality, captured the moment of her entry into the distortion, while her biological clock endured the full, impossible passage of time within the slip. This non-linear theory offers a potent and disturbing explanation for the enduring, pervasive superstition of the Highlanders. If their ancestors were constantly, randomly exposed to echoes of the past or ominous flickers of the future, their reliance on ritual, warding, and deep spiritual belief was not a cultural quirk or a sign of ignorance, but an absolutely essential defense mechanism against an unstable, unpredictable reality. They learned through generations of terrifying experience to respect the forces that could distort perception and manifest terrifying physical anomalies, for their survival depended on it. The psychological impact of such an unstable reality is immense. Imagine the cognitive dissonance, the gnawing doubt that must plague those who experience a time slip. How do you trust your memory, your watch, or your sanity when the world itself contradicts them? The victims of these anomalies are forced to live with the chilling knowledge that their reality is contingent, fragile, and subject to instantaneous, unexplained collapse. It is a psychological burden far greater than merely seeing a conventional ghost. Ultimately, these accounts force us to ask the most chilling question, one that undermines the very foundation of our understanding. Is the human mind simply misinterpreting sensory input in a challenging environment? Or are the Scottish Highlands genuinely a geological and spiritual area where the fabric of reality has eroded, creating a perpetual chronological abyss? Whether these glitches are the inevitable byproduct of unique geology, a flaw in local physics, or a deliberate ongoing manifestation of an ancient, sentient power unique to the land, the stories remain. They are an unsettling, undeniable testament to a land where history is not confined to the pages of a book or the lines of a clock, but is constantly, unnervingly playing out around us, compelling us to accept that we truly understand only a fraction of the world we inhabit. The cold mists and silent ancient stones of Scotland keep their secrets well, whispering that the most terrifying phantoms are not those that take your life, but those that steal, erase, and distort your very time. If you have ever felt that cold, disorienting pull of lost time, or if you believe the concept of a nonlinear reality is terrifyingly possible, I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below with your perspective. Are these true timeline glitches, or something far more ancient and sinister at work in the Highlands? And if you want to continue exploring the deep psychological horror and cold analysis of these terrifying mysteries, be sure to like and subscribe. It's the only way to ensure you don't get left behind in the chronological darkness.